Welcome to the Honor.THE.GIFT podcast. I am your host, Art McCracken. I specialize in transformational leadership and high-performance coaching. I've worked with hundreds of companies and thousands of individuals along the way, helping them achieve greater outcomes in all aspects of their life. I'm a speaker and writer, but at the end of the day, none of that holds a candle to being a husband, father, and friend. I believe the greatest gift in our mortal existence is the gift of choice. How we honor that gift will shape the eternities. I also believe that career is a way of being and not just a way of life. And when you figure that out, by learning to let go of the charades and leaning into growth, life just seems to unlock itself. I know this because I've lived it. Quite simply, my calling is people experience living true. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the commitment to lean into growth. I honor your journey. Now, let's do this. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Honor.THE.GIFT podcast. This week's topic is ACT. And action, as we know, is the opposite of reaction. So ACT is the opposite of react. Action comes from a place of confidence and conviction. It's unfettered from the winds and drift found in reactivity. Negativity begets negativity. Positivity begets positivity. As you learn to govern your emotions, to pause the reactivity that can come with a closely tied emotional response. I remember that my mom would always challenge me to count to 10. Anytime I would get frustrated or angry, or I would experience something that triggered an emotion and a need to react or a desire to react, she would always tell me, make sure you count to 10. And I'm sure that that was advice that her mom had given her, that she had learned from somewhere and felt it was an important lesson to teach me. So, who does your reaction serve? Are you future-focused and confident in your own game and level of performance that you might be seeking? You see, the winds will blow you every which way if you're not focused and you're not intentional. And you'll find yourself in a constant state of turmoil and non-satisfaction. Reactivity tends to be a shortcut that doesn't require much thinking on our part. It taps into assessments of the past, and it predicts a future that's unattached to our own contribution. It's easy. It's a very, very easy path. In science, reactivity, it's a measure of how readily a substance undergoes a chemical reaction. When it comes to human behavior, to be reactive is to be ready to react or respond to something else as opposed to ready to act on one's own. A person who's reactive will do things only in response to others. So what this tells me is that those of us who have a tendency to react more quickly than others are probably the most in need of some pre-planning and intentionality around who we are and how we want to show up in our own game of life. Here's the harsh reality behind the psychology of reactivity. You'll want to really hear this and soak in, really just let this kind of soak into your mind and play with this for a bit. So here we go. This is the psychology of reactivity. Reactivity refers to the human tendency to change their behavior when they know that they are being watched. This is a part of the normal human desire to be perceived in the best possible light and not be judged in a negative way. Let me read that one more time. Reactivity refers to the human tendency to change their behavior when they know that they are being watched. This is a part of the normal human desire to be perceived in the best possible light and not be judged in a negative way. When we react, we tend to agree with someone else's emotion, someone else's perspective and viewpoint, and we tend to adopt all of those things as something that we play into or fight against. So be intentional and practice the pause as we've talked about before. Are you fully aware of your emotional response and triggers? When we have a tendency for reaction, we're typically the target for easy manipulation. Your best requires a high level of consistency and commitment to your standards and way of being. Are you front-loading? What do I mean by that? Specifically, how are you preparing for those times when your emotional response paired with a reaction might set you back in your journey forward? Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you're enjoying this week's episode. If growth, personal growth and development is your thing, and you're here learning and leaning into growth, glad you're here, glad you're part of the community. If you want more of this, make sure and hit subscribe in this podcast platform or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Search for Honor the Gift podcast and make sure and subscribe so that it shows up each week with new updates, new conversations, new learning, new ideas and concepts, again, to help us all in this journey we call growth and how we make it through life and the way that we show up for others. Also, if you are looking for more information, deeper dives into some of these conversations, and just an update to stay in the loop, you can always go to choiceisthegift.com and click on subscribe, where you'll be in the loop on things that are upcoming and more updates on this podcast. Again, thank you for being here. Now let's get back to the episode. So front loading is deciding beforehand, if this, then that. If I'm presented with a situation that typically causes a reaction or triggers something emotional inside me that I tend to react to or act out on that information or that external stimulus, am I going to prepare myself for that specific event? Am I going to think about it ahead of time and plan for what I want my reaction to be? So this requires a high level of self-awareness and a commitment to creating a different outcome. I recently had the chance to sit down with my daughter, Kensley. We weren't on the same page, definitely had alternate and diverse perspectives of what was and each other's way of being. When tempers and emotions finally calmed down, I asked a simple question that was met with another dose of justification for the reaction, which gave us a moment to slow down once again, to really slow down and dive into an opportunity for intentionality. And I asked her this question. I said, Kensley, how do you want others to experience you? And when she really carefully thought through that, in a moment of clear space and non-reactivity, she simply stated that she wanted others to experience love. And so what that then produced was an opportunity to dive into questions around, okay, if others are not experiencing love when they're with you, what does that mean? What new actions need to take place? If one perspective is different than your own, how does that align then with your actions and reactions? So how do you want others to experience you? If we want others to experience something specific, it requires a high level of intentionality and purpose. It requires that we set the need to be seen through a funnel of quick reaction by the wayside. It means that we better get crystal clear with ourselves about how we go about creating an aligned experience for those around us. I am blank. That's meant to fill in the blank. I think oftentimes we label ourselves as I am angry, I am happy, I am satisfied, I am great. How often do we consciously and unconsciously fill in that blank with both greater than or less than ego-driven statements? The quick labeling of self in any context provides a mental servitude to that label. The act of being, when left unassigned for someone to hear and take notice, has lasting and certainly superficial diversion. Now, this is going to go deep for a minute. This is opening yourself to a way of being rather than a desire to be noticed. For in that moment, when tongue begins to connect with desire of visibility or assign meaning, do not fill in the blank. Avoid it as best you can. If not, it'll knock you off the path to becoming your best self. And that's where reactivity doesn't serve us. The better approach and statement of self comes in the form of a question instead of a statement. The question is, am I, rather than I am. Am I, fill in the blank. Am I willing to assess without public notice or collusion to justify one's being? Am I willing to become without reward and validation from others? Am I willing to divorce myself of ego and define myself by actions more closely aligned with what I want others to experience? Am I willing to live true? These are the tough questions of self-awareness, and they can be a weapon against the reactivity of a stagnant existence. For each of us, it's time to act. It is time to be creative in our design and clear in our objectives. It's time to take bold action around those things that we are intentional about. We should have multiple times throughout the day that we've either set a reminder or we've left a note someplace or we've got some method of communicating to the front of our mind those things that we want to be intentional about. And oftentimes the things that we should be intentional about are what we want others to experience through our actions. So act, don't react. Remember that growth is always a choice. Until next week, my friends, make it a great one. And remember to always honor the gift.